A 27-year-old press aide walked into a room full of veteran reporters and dismantled them one by one. By the time she turned to CNN's Kaitlan Collins, it was already too late. Caroline Leavitt didn't look like someone who could dominate a national press corps. At just 27, she lacked the career lines etched into the faces of the reporters seated before her. But as she entered the White House briefing room that morning, something was already shifting. Not in her, but in them. Microphones were adjusted a little too carefully. Notebooks were checked, closed, reopened. The usual small talk, quiet complaints about lighting, camera placement, or the seating chart, had vanished. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Leavitt approached the podium without notes. Her suit was sharply tailored but modest. Pale gray, almost unmemorable. What people would remember wasn't the fabric, but the stillness in her face. No smile, no nerves. Just focus. Most briefing rooms run on habit. The press corps knows the game. They jab, they circle, they sometimes wound. But they rarely expect real resistance. Especially not from someone this young. Leavitt scanned the room, her eyes brushing past PBS, NPR, and NBC until they settled, unblinking, on Kaitlan Collins in the front row. Collins had covered 3 administrations, countless crises. She held a pen as if it were a scalpel. She nodded, slightly. An invitation. Leavitt nodded back, barely perceptible. Then spoke. "Thank you for being here. National security is our top priority, and I'm here to clarify any doubts." Her voice was low, but exact. Unhurried. It didn't ask for authority. It assumed it. The room stayed silent. For the first time in a long time, reporters didn't interrupt the opening statement. No one filled the silence with a question. And Leavitt let that discomfort stretch. Then Kaitlan raised her hand. "Regarding the Signalgate leak, what has the administration done to address it? Or is President Trump trying to cover up critical information related to national security?" It was the obvious opening shot. Sharp, direct, built for soundbite headlines. Leavitt didn't answer right away. She adjusted the mic. "There is no cover-up. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI completed their reviews. No evidence of a compromised leak. The report was sent to Congress last week. If CNN missed it, perhaps they were chasing another headline." No raise in tone. No dramatic pause. Just a cold blade of facts, delivered point by point. A ripple went through the room. Collins opened her mouth again. But Leavitt spoke first. "Or do you just prefer speculation over source material?" It wasn't just a clash. It was the beginning of a public reckoning. Collins didn't flinch, but the pen in her hand stopped moving. Leavitt had struck first, and she'd done it without blinking. Now, something older than confidence moved through the room, unease. The kind that comes when the script starts to slip. Collins tried again, recalibrating. "The administration's press release didn't address the internal communication breach. Are you confirming no classified content was leaked at all?" The question was tighter now, defensive without appearing so. She was attempting to reframe, regain control. Leavitt didn't offer her an inch. "The leaked messages were from a low-level staffer. No classified material. That staffer has been suspended. Protocol was followed. That's the end of the story." It wasn't sarcasm this time. It was precision. Measured detachment, not disdain. But then, almost as an afterthought, came the blade. "Unless CNN is now interested in promoting HR violations as breaking news." A few reporters chuckled. Quietly. Collins noticed. The balance was tilting. Not because of volume or outrage, but because Leavitt didn't chase the rhythm the room was used to. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't even reactive. She was architectural, building something unshakable, one clause at a time. A reporter from MSNBC raised a hand, trying to pivot the briefing. Collins, for the first time, hesitated. But Leavitt gestured toward her. "Miss Collins, you seem eager. One more?" It wasn't cruel. It was calculated. An offer to climb out, or step in deeper. Collins straightened her shoulders. "If there's nothing to hide, why not release all internal messages from the administration? Why limit transparency?" Leavitt didn't sigh. She didn't frown. She leaned forward slightly, as if inviting a closer look. "Because transparency isn't chaos. Releasing thousands of irrelevant emails fuels confusion, not clarity. Our adversaries, Russia, China, use misinformation for destabilization. Are you asking us to help them?" She paused. Not for drama, but for weight. Or is CNN only comfortable when things burn? The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of calculation, discomfort, and realignment. Collins didn't reply. She didn't need to. The room already had. A Newsmax reporter raised a hand. Leavitt nodded. Go ahead. It was subtle, but understood. Control had shifted. Not through aggression. Through order. Leavitt had made herself the axis. And everyone else was rotating around her. The Fox News and Newsmax reporters began to lean forward, not with glee, but readiness. They sensed something forming. Not a win, exactly. More like the arrival of structure. Of someone who wasn't fumbling for talking points. Leavitt stood firm behind the podium, expression unchanged. The air in the room was now different. Reporters weren't just listening. They were recalibrating. The next question came from a reporter at the Hill, neutral in tone but tactically sharp. Miss Leavitt, Costa Blanca has formally protested the deportation of a man your administration tied to MS-13. Multiple outlets report inconsistencies in the paperwork. Can you clarify? It was a technical challenge, not a political one. And it was delivered by someone the room respected. Leavitt adjusted her sleeve, then spoke as if reading from a transcript memorized long ago. The individual in question was legally removed under Title VIII proceedings. 2 separate immigration courts confirmed his MS-13 affiliation, including evidence from sealed cases. As for paperwork errors, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that the process followed protocol. She let the number hang in the air. Then came the pivot. Now, if this room is suggesting that confirmed gang members should be granted reprieve due to clerical tone, I suggest you speak plainly. Because the American people deserve to know where you stand. There was no applause this time. Just the faint sound of keyboards clicking again. Collins sat motionless, her hand around her microphone, but unmoving. The questions had moved on without her, yet her presence still carried weight. Leavitt glanced in her direction. Not with disdain, but with something cooler. Like a surgeon eyeing the incision that hadn't closed properly. She continued. This administration has reduced deportation processing errors by 30% in the last fiscal year. We've returned focus to violent offenders, including 117 MS-13 members in the past 11 months. These are not accidental numbers. They are results. It wasn't just what she said. It was the manner, calm, numerical, unmoved by political provocation. And yet, the media sensed the game had changed. It wasn't just that Leavitt was sharp. It was that she didn't care if they approved. What came next would turn clarity into spectacle. By now, the atmosphere in the briefing room had stopped feeling like news. It felt like precedent. The shift was no longer just about Caroline Leavitt's answers. It was about the unease forming in the muscle memory of reporters who'd played this game for decades, and were suddenly unsure of the rules. Kaitlan Collins spoke again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But with a trace of tension now creeping under her tone. Miss Leavitt, how does deporting individuals under flawed systems align with the administration's claim to protect due process? Costa Blanca's government says they were blindsided. Leavitt didn't look at her right away. She took a sip of water, then set the glass down slowly. I understand CNN's attachment to narrative, but we don't govern by sentiment. The deportation followed both judicial review and international protocol. Our office offered logistical support to Costa Blanca within 72 hours. If they felt blindsided, perhaps they were unprepared for accountability. She turned fully to Collins. And if CNN wants to redefine due process, I'd suggest starting with the cases of American families impacted by MS-13, families you rarely cover. There was no insult. No raised voice. But it landed like a stone. Collins shifted in her chair. Her hand gripped the mic. But she didn't speak. A few rows back, an NBC correspondent quietly shut their notebook. The question, it seemed, had been answered, decisively. The next reporter didn't wait. They asked about tariffs. The economy. Something safer. But Leavitt was ready. Tariffs, she began, have brought 1.2 million manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. per the Labor Department. Steel output is up 25%. And for families concerned about rising costs, personal income tax cuts have increased disposable income by an average of $2,850. Someone in the back muttered a number under their breath, checking it. It was accurate. America isn't being punished, she added. It's waking up. And then, she looked directly into the cameras. Not at a reporter. Not at the room. But at the millions watching. If paying $1 more for a product made in this country keeps a factory open in Pennsylvania, I think Americans understand what that means. The sentence didn't demand applause. But from the back of the room, it came anyway. A brief clap. Then another. Collins remained silent. Her hand rested still on the microphone. But she was no longer holding the room. Someone else was. What had started as a press briefing now felt like something else. Less performance, more revelation. Caroline Leavitt wasn't answering questions anymore. She was issuing positions. Not campaign slogans, not evasion. Positions that made the room reconsider what they had walked in expecting. Kaitlan Collins sat still. Her eyes sharp, posture firm, but something behind it had softened. Reporters weren't watching her anymore. They were watching Leavitt. A Politico correspondent raised a question on foreign policy. It was precise. Miss Leavitt, what is the administration's strategic logic in maintaining strong ties with leaders like Vladimir Putin? Is that not a liability for national security? Leavitt's answer came like a machine. Measured, metallic. We've reduced Russian oil imports by 15%, imposed 3 rounds of economic sanctions, and expanded NATO readiness protocols. These are not signs of deference. They are calculations. Diplomacy exists not to flatter, but to avoid war. She paused, then added, if CNN prefers hostility to strategy, that's a different briefing. It was a clear reference. Kaitlan didn't move. Reporters from Axios and Reuters scribbled faster now. Not because they agreed, but because something undeniable had happened. Leavitt had turned confrontation into control. An NPR reporter whispered to her colleague, she's 27? The answer came with a short nod. Outside the room, the internet had already noticed. A clip of Leavitt's earlier exchange with Collins had reached 2.3 million views. The phrase, "Are you asking us to help them?" her response about foreign misinformation, was trending on X. Inside, a new hand rose. CNN's Collins again. Her voice, now quieter, asked, will the administration disclose transcripts of recent diplomatic calls with Russia and China to reassure the public? It was procedural. It was fair. And it was a final attempt to claim solid ground. Leavitt's eyes didn't narrow. Her tone didn't shift. Miss Collins, diplomacy is not reality television. Disclosing sensitive calls damages global alliances. Last year, a leak delayed a NATO cyber agreement by 3 months, costing billions. We protect Americans. Not plot points. Then, calmly, you've asked the same question in 3 forms. I've answered all 3. I recommend checking the tape. A final slash. No cruelty. Just end. And with that, Leavitt turned her gaze to the rest of the room. Next? There was no rush to respond. The silence that followed wasn't defeat. It was recognition. A collective moment in which the entire press corps understood they had lost control of the room, and Caroline Leavitt had not taken it by force. She had simply refused to give it back. A Breitbart reporter asked about defense ties with Poland and Taiwan. Leavitt answered without glancing at notes. We are redesigning the diplomatic framework to support allies through direct investment, shared intelligence, and expanded military presence. Peace doesn't come from statements. It comes from posture. Her words were crisp, dry. There was no theatrics. But the way she delivered them, still, cold, perfectly timed, made it feel like the room had no choice but to follow. Kaitlan Collins remained seated. Not scribbling. Just listening. Her microphone rested on her lap now. She had not surrendered, but she had stepped back. The tempo was no longer hers. Outside the briefing room, it was a different kind of storm. Twitter timelines flooded with clips. Caroline Leavitt ends CNN with 6 words. Read one caption. Another simply posted. 27. No notes. No stumbles. All control. On cable news, the headlines diverged sharply. Fox ran a segment calling Leavitt the future of conservative messaging. MSNBC described her as alarming, calculated, and deeply effective. But even critics couldn't dismiss her. Inside the West Wing, aides watched in silence. One staffer from a rival office texted another. She just handled the press better than half the cabinet. Meanwhile, Collins, back at her desk, opened her email to a flood of interview requests, most asking not about her questions, but about how it felt to be overrun. She didn't answer any of them. She simply closed her inbox and opened a Word document, beginning to outline what she had missed. Her hands moved quickly, methodically. She hadn't quit. But she knew now, Leavitt wasn't just prepared. She was engineered for this. And yet, even as the tension built, Leavitt herself remained untouched by the noise. She declined interviews that afternoon. No celebratory tweet. No clip sharing. Just a scheduled internal meeting on border policy. Inside that meeting, an aide said, half-joking, "They're calling you a media assassin." Leavitt didn't smile. She just looked up. "I gave them answers. They weren't used to that." And then, quietly, she returned to the agenda. By the next morning, the impact had settled in like weather, not sudden, but everywhere. The clip of Caroline Leavitt calmly dismissing Kaitlan Collins. "You've asked the same question in 3 forms." Had surpassed 5 million views. Hashtags multiplied. So did speculation. Was this the beginning of a political rise? Or just a moment, brilliantly executed then forgotten? Inside conservative circles, the answer was already forming. Rachel Morland reposted the clip with a single line. "The next generation has arrived." Tucker Carlson called her the most disciplined voice in the White House in a decade. Even critics admitted something had changed. "She's not a star," said one MSNBC analyst. "She's an instrument. And she's been sharpened." Meanwhile, Collins gave no interviews. She reviewed the footage quietly with her editorial team. Watched it more than once. Took notes not just on Leavitt's answers, but on her silences. Her posture. The way she had reversed the rhythm of the room. "She controls pace," Collins said finally. "That's rare." Her producer asked if she wanted to avoid direct exchanges with Leavitt for the next briefing. Collins shook her head. "No. We go again." But she knew. The ground had shifted. Not just between them. Across the whole dynamic. In the White House, Leavitt's phone stayed silent to the public. No social media engagement. No post-briefing interview circuit. But behind closed doors, strategy meetings began changing. Her name was now mentioned in policy sessions, not just media prep. Senior advisors, watching her Q&A segments, saw what the country had seen: discipline without distance, clarity without spectacle. One even suggested a new media directive. Use Leavitt's model. Answer first. Argue second. Never perform. That was the real lesson. She hadn't crushed the press. She had simply redefined what the administration expected from confrontation, not defense, but design. And somewhere deep in the data room of a pollster's office, her name entered a list it hadn't been on before. Not for strategy. Not even for messaging. But for something bigger. Potential. Because for all the headlines, the virality, the polarized reactions, one truth became clear: Leavitt had walked into a briefing expected to survive, and left as the one person in the room nobody could afford to underestimate again. And this wasn't the end. It was the first moment that felt like a beginning.